What is up, guys? Wraec here with a new video, and today I want to talk about a strategy for Star Expedition that might actually multiply your damage by a ton, and that I think is a little bit broken, and the age might actually regret. And it has to do with a new artifact that was released. And I haven't actually seen too many people talk about this artifact yet, so we're going to do this in this video, and maybe you want to try it in Star Expedition when it comes around. It's not too far away. Of course, I haven't tested it there yet, but maybe you want to use it there. So let's take a look at the artifacts. We have two artifacts. We have the normal version of the Scissors of Conviction, and then we have the Shears of Destiny, which is the deific version. The Shears of Destiny do have a disadvantage for this. Actually, the Scissors of Conviction are a little bit better. We are going to go over why. So, we have never read this artifact. What it does, essentially, is following at the end of each round, selects 2 random enemies, replicates up to 2 random attribute buffs from each of them to self, and allies on the same line. The original remaining duration and 30% of the attribute buff effects will be reserved. So, meaning, let's say the enemy has a 20% attack buff with a duration of 15 rounds. We steal this, or we replicate this attack buff. We don't remove this attack buff with this artifact, so it stays on the enemy. We get a copy of it, essentially, with 30% of the buff effect, meaning instead of 20% attack buff, we get 6% attack buff, which is 30% of 20%, and we get the entire duration, which was 15 rounds. So, but not only the hero carrying this artifact gets this, actually, the entire line, they say, I assume they mean the entire back row, gets this buff as well. So we can in fact run multiple copies of this artifact to copy a buff multiple times. Let's say this, we have the entire back row, everybody on the back row is carrying a Scissors of Conviction, and we copy the same attack buff we just talked about. Then we copy it 4 times in total. Every hero on the row gets it 4 times with 30% buff effect, meaning we actually don't get it at 30% buff effect, we basically get it at 120% in overall. So we would get a 24% attack buff for the entire row. So, is this insane? Well, that part didn't really sound too insane, didn't it? We would need some very specific, very big buff, and in some situations like Forced, where we took a look at it, it has already proven that copying too many weird buffs can actually sometimes do very little, sometimes actually reduce your damage. If you, for example, just copy a ton of crit buffs, cap out your crit, and your balance strike gets deactivated because you have 100% crit suddenly, and sometimes be exceptionally good. So we would have to have a boss that has limited self buffs, but those would have to be very good, and we have one of those. We actually have the Star Expedition boss, who only has 2 self buffs really, and those are both spectacularly good. But before we go into that, let's talk about why we don't want Shears of Destiny. We just talked about a potential use of 4 of those artifacts, which I think in Star Expedition might be a little bit too much, but you might come away with like running 1 or 2. So, it does essentially the same thing. 2, still 1 point until here. Then the effect gets basically added, which is the deific part. Afterwards, there's an 80% chance of removing 1 attribute reduction effect from allies on the same line respectively. And this would be still very, very good to have actually. But then we come to the point, and an 80% chance of removing 1 random attribute buff from the enemy. And the problem is, if we have a boss with limited buffs and we remove one of those, this might actually result in us removing all of the buffs from the boss and leaving no buffs to copy for our other Shears of Destiny, respectively Scissors of Conviction. So you actually want to do it with the base version here. So why is the Star Expedition boss good for that? Let's take a look at his abilities. First of all, let's take a look at the hard mode boss and at his active skill. What we find in here is that this boss actually reduces armor, okay, but with his active skill also steals 5% of their attack for 3 rounds, referring to your entire team. So he has an attack buff worth 5% of the attack of your entire team. And if you are a little bit of a whale and you have essentially 100 million attack on everybody on your team, and on some heroes even maybe 200 or 250 million, 5%, that can be quite a stack of attack. So we can copying that back to us already kind of juicy. That is a nice thing to do actually. So pretty good buff already to steal. But now, I mean, that is nice. We get 30% of the effect. We get a ton of attack. So this is the one buff that he has, and it's already a good one. But this guy actually has a way better buff still. So let's take a look at one of his passive skills. Passive skill, Corrupting Touch. After being attacked by active skills or basic attack, launches counterattacks to all enemies, dealing 800% of attack damage, and inflicts one layer of calamity on them, with a 50% chance to inflict one layer of Curse of Decay on all enemies. Whenever an enemy is inflicted with fear, increase self-holy damage by 50% for 15 rounds. Every time he inflicts fear, he gets a holy damage 50% buff for 15 rounds. So for the entire buff. Do you remember them nerfing Gurki? For giving us like 300% holy damage over the entire fight? Well, that's going to be a little bit funny. If nobody on your team is fear immune and your entire team, 6 heroes, gets inflicted with fear, this boss gains 300% holy damage. Oh, and what happens now if we have 4 Scissors of Conviction on the team? Well, this boss only has 2 buffs, right? So we copy the attack buff and we copy the holy damage buff. So that would mean we have a 300% buff where we get 30% off. So we get, well, that's 90%, isn't it? 90% buff for the entire back row for every Scissor of Conviction that we use, plus a ton of attack. Which, I mean, they scale together, so it's kind of nice. And then we have another one. So it's 180%. And another one, 270%. And another one, that's 360% holy damage with 15 rounds duration every single round, as long as this guy inflicts fear on 6 heroes. I mean, we could kind of let this buff go on him. We don't really have to remove it. We have certainly options to remove it. And oftentimes, I mean, the one hero that is often used to remove buffs actually is MFF. Many people forget it, but there's actually, look at that, and removes 2 attribute buffs from them. So she is actually removing attribute buffs, which would remove this buff. But if we made the team without MFF, we could actually let this scale. If you can survive that, different question. Most players, I think, would rather remove this buff every now and then. I think that would be more healthy. But yeah, it is an option. Other heroes that remove buffs are actually DGN. If I can find mine. There's a 50% chance to remove 1 attribute reduction effect from self. Oh, that's a wrong one. There, 100% chance. No, also wrong. There is an attribute remover somewhere. It exists. Believe me, it's on her. It was in the DT. There it is. It removes 1 random buff from enemy with the highest attack. We can, of course, deactivate that if you want to. But DGN, actually a nice thing to note. Well, we just established that if we have heroes with Scissors of Conviction, we can actually replicate the buff on the entire backline. So also on, for example, a DGN. And DGN has a nice effect on her basic. Basic meaning, well, deals some damage, okay, nice. More for every attribute reduction, also nice. There is a 100% chance to replicate 2 random attributes buffs from self to allies with Bright Blessing. And the H fixed that, because in the past it used to be like Bright Blessing, which gets applied to the highest attack hero, if I remember correctly. That could be on herself, and so she could scale and scale and scale holy damage. They made it so it could only apply to another hero. That hero usually being something like your LFA. So, but still kind of OP if she has like this insane ginormous holy damage buff that she can always copy over to the LFA, for example. So let's just say last round we were able to get 360% holy damage, so our buff from the 4 Scissors of Conviction. And now in the next round she does a basic attack, hits that holy damage buff as one of the random attribute buffs, copies it over to LFA, which 100% of the remaining duration that attribute buff will be reserved, so it won't actually get weaker. Then she just provided LFA a 360% holy damage buff in one singular round with just a single active skill, a single basic skill. Keep in mind, that was just one round. On the next round, when we are able to do the same again and have 6 heroes inflicted with fear, and get the same buff from Scissors of Conviction again, she has a 720% holy damage buff on herself. which you can then copy over to the LFA again, if you are that lucky. I mean, we're talking about the theoretical high roll here. The fact is the DGN will have a ton of buffs. Sometimes she will not copy the holy damage buff. But in theory, within just 2 rounds, and that is the madness, within just 2 rounds, he 2 times got a 360% holy damage buff from Scissors of Conviction, so 720%. He also 1 time got 360% holy damage buff from DGN. So at that point we're already at 1080%. And then DGN with a bit of luck converted or copied over her 720% holy damage buff again. So we got 1800% holy damage on turn 2. Yeah, turn 2. 1800% by turn 2. And I mean, I kind of feel like they broke their own fix for the DGN meta a little bit. I mean, it's not really an exponential meta like it was on DGN, where she copied the buffs for herself, and next time she copied the buffs, she copied to herself, and etc. It's a little bit more tame, but still absolutely OP. And holy damage doesn't have a cap in that regard, so you can copy over. But now you ask, well, Wraec, we have kind of full energy feed on my team for the boss. How do I get DGN to actually do a basic attack? Well, there's not really a cheap method. There is an expensive method, however, and that is something that I already did during Omega Project times. This was like something that Jesus and I actually experimented with. I remember him summoning an S-tier DGN actually with an S-core he had, and getting like one with 90-something speed and like no attack. It was a little bit devastating. But the way you do it, you get a fear immune DGN. And why do you get a fear immune DGN? Well, you get a fear immune DGN and you get no attribute reduction. You get no control purify. And you hope to place her on the last attacker tile. So you have 5 heroes attacking in front of her, which with the layers of decay that the boss has, results in her getting CC'd. Well, if she's fear immune and she gets CC'd, she gets silenced. And heroes with silence can't do an active skill. So no matter if she has full energy, she can't do an active skill. And the way with fear works is it actually doesn't block you from attacking. It just blocks you from doing the active skill. So no matter if you have full energy, you will do basic skill. Which means you can force the basic skill, not every single round, because sometimes she won't get CC'd, but a lot by having fear immunity. And by the way, knowing that now, you like the roll, right? It's a nice roll. I got that, I was so happy. And people were like, oh, why are you running fear immunity? Yeah, because of that. That is just such a nice roll, I love it. So that is what you do. Place her on as a 6th attacker, and then you try to copy over. And yeah, so that is kind of the Scissors of Conviction strategy that I was talking about. I was talking about 4 scissors, of course. I don't even have 4 scissors. And I mean, I was a little bit fast there and upgraded to Shears of Destiny. I don't even know if you can regress those things. I don't think you can. Like you can't, I think you can like disassemble them and make them again into normal shears. But I don't think you can get like back to this point, to the normal base artifact. And by the way, you really want to have this one at Splendid, because it's actually the buff effect that gets reduced. It's buff effect 10, 20 or 30% at Splendid. So this one really want that at Splendid rather than having multiple at a lower stage. So that is something to keep in mind. Yeah, this one very much so better for most situations, very much so better if you struggle with surviving. A ton better for PvP, actually gives you immune to shapeshifting, not better for this boss situation that we are facing right there, so that is something to keep in mind. But that was just like, I think they're going to nerf that, because it's so OP. It's obviously so OP. I mean, we kind of crafted a little bit of a way here that was of course stronger than the strategy might be at the end, because oftentimes you won't replicate the holy damage buff with DGN, but still it's a ton of holy damage floating around. It's a ton of holy damage that you can put on your LFA, and while of course if you get more and more of the same stat, it kind of becomes less effective than getting, for example, a little bit more skill damage. But if you kind of play your cards right and you skill your hero in the right manner, and you, for example, you cap out your precision, you have your armor break going, you have your crit damage, you have the right amount of crit, and you don't focus on holy damage at all, but instead go for skill damage and then scale the holy damage with DGN. That is some serious damage. Do I need that? No, bloody hell no. It's like, I already one-shot the first boss, so what am I going to do with that damage? I mean, it could maybe make it 100% so that I one-shot it every single time. But DG, I kind of like that DH set themselves up now that they kind of have the DGN problem back. Because there is a little bit of a controversy here. My Star Expedition team is largely CC immune. Largely immune to effects like silence or to fear. And that actually makes the team receive less CC overall. Because they are very rarely CC'd. Okay, I can sometimes only get like 2 CC effects in a round. So that could lead to some whale teams that have a ton of CI, and a ton of immunities actually doing less good than the weaker teams. And this is something that was the same as last time with the DGN stuff. And I think this might end up with them nerfing either the Shears of Destiny or changing the boss. By the way, the simplest, if somebody from DH Games is watching this and you want a really simple fix for your boss issue, just make this guy buff his own crit. Super simple fix. Just after an active skill, give him a crit buff. You can make it stupid so that it gets removed before he attacks the next time, but just give him a 100% crit buff. So that would actually result in LFA capping his own crit, getting 100% crit, and then Balance Strike doesn't work anymore, and likely you will deal less damage than without Shears of Destiny against the Star Expedition boss. But yeah, that if you want to have a fix, that's your fix. You can also try other things, but I think that's the easiest way to do it and the least impactful for all the players. Because if DH really wants to nerf this artifact, they have a little bit of a problem in that they made this thing the #1 drop for this entire event. Like, you have Mysterious Artifact here, not for any reason. That is Mysterious Artifact because they put it in here. And if you check out the VIP XP thing, where is it? Yeah, it's also in here. So yeah, I'm not sure. If they nerf this thing, that's a problem. But I just thought I'd show you guys this strategy. There's not really no use in keeping it a secret, considering, I mean, like, they didn't update the Star Expedition boss, so just go ahead, get yourself your loot, and that's about it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, and we'll see us in the next one.